Welcome, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to this gathering of the Way Forward. I'm Reverend Lori Bruce, a clergy member of the Mountain Sky Conference, and I live here in Rocky River, and I'm a volunteer clergy person here at this church. And I'll be your moderator tonight for the gathering. First, I want to start with scripture. And our scripture tonight is from Matthew 22:36 through 40, which says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments." Let us pray. Dear God, creator, redeemer, and sustainer, we ask your blessing and guidance in this time of concern and conflict and upheaval in our beloved United Methodist Church. We ask for new insights and solutions in this gathering and in the future for our local church and the United Methodist Church. Please help us to remember to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves in all that we do. In our Son's name we pray. Amen. Now tonight, our purpose is an information sharing and listening time to review and report the decisions made by the Special Session and Judicial Council of the United Methodist Church and how these intersect with the mission of this church. And I'd like to introduce the church leaders who are with me here tonight. Phil Arducci, raise your hand. Reverend Dr. Steve Bailey, our district superintendent. Bill Coles, our Ad Council chairperson. Tom Dewey, Finance Committee Chairperson, Sally Lenhart, Staff Parish Relations Committee Chairperson, and Cindy Schaefer, Trustees Representative. Now, we're going to have some presentations and some question and comment time. And so when we do this, you know how these things go, I'd like to try to keep the questions and the answers to about 30 seconds. And I'll be the one that is saying, hey, come on back. We'll get to as many questions and answers and comments as we can before 8:30. That's our time that we'd like to close this event. I have been in different things like this. And in fact, my annual conference, they created a way to bring heated discussion back down to earth. So I have this candle here. There's actually a fake candle that I will turn on, which is pretty cool. And so if things start to get too heated, I will come over and turn this candle on, and then I will say a prayer to bring us back to what we need to be talking about. So if you see me heading towards that candle, you'll know what's going to happen. If you have a question for either Pastor Dan or Pastor Paul, please talk to them privately at another time other than tonight. And also, just like in the movies, I don't have a fancy way to say this, but please mute your phones so that we don't have something ringing in the middle of our discussions. Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask our district superintendent, Reverend Dr. Steve Bailey, to come up, and he's going to give an overview and update on the Special Session and Judicial Council. Steve?
Well, good evening. My name is Steve. I'm your district superintendent in the United Methodist Church. That means I work with 50 congregations in the greater Cleveland area. There's other district superintendents that supervise up to 80 churches in our conference. There's 10 of us, and we work directly with our bishop, Tracy Malone. And so I get to work with your staff and your staff parish committee and get here from time to time just to come to worship. So thank you for inviting me tonight. When we talk about things like General Conference, Judicial Council, things like that, one of the things I really quickly learn is that this is pretty technical stuff. And a lot of our members, somewhere maybe back in your confirmation class, you heard about a thing called the Book of Discipline, which is our rule book. And every 4 years, General Conference gathers, and they can rewrite anything in the book. So there are things in here that talk about all sorts of things like the structure of districts and annual conferences, international mission work, credentials for those who want to be ordained, the different levels of ordination, all that sort of stuff. And so typically when a general conference gathers, anything in here can be edited. There's a process where if there's a need to create a new committee in every local church, for example, that could go and be voted on and approved and put into practice. So a lot of the questions that people have asked me are not simple, like yes-no questions. They're sort of like, well, if you understand the structure of the Methodist Church, then what the Judicial Council is makes sense. So let me just try to do a couple really wide sweeping things, and we can get as technical as you want. But first thing to know is the General Conference is an international gathering that happens every 4 years. In 2016, it gathered, and as has happened in my entire ministry career since I was in seminary back in 1984, there's been a tug of war around what do we say about the LGBTQ community, what are the standards in terms of ordination, and most recently, as same-sex marriage has been allowed across the country, what does the Methodist Church say about our ability to perform those or for us to host those? So there's been a lot of discussion through the years as the church has tried to figure out the best way to be in ministry and to articulate our beliefs. Probably doesn't surprise you, in 1984, there was a very small minority of people who thought that gay people should be welcomed and included in our churches. That has changed significantly during my ministry career to where now there are many churches, even if they don't, I won't use the word condone, if they don't fully accept homosexuality, they still care about how people are treated and they still welcome them. So there's a whole spectrum in terms of the United Methodist Church and how our churches implement their theological understanding around this issue. Now, what you need to know is in 2016, as has happened at every other general conference, there's a tug of war. There's some people who passionately say, I have gay members, if they want to be married, why should I not be able to conduct that marriage ceremony? And if they're members of our church, then why does an external force get to say that they can't be married in our church? Okay? There are other people who say, the scriptures are very clear about this. We've had historical teachings about this. And if you're anybody over 50, you probably grew up in a culture where homosexuality was thought of differently when you were a kid than it is today. You never saw a gay couple on TV in 1970, believe me. So the country's changed. People's theological understanding has changed. And because of that, after another battle where basically nothing happened in terms of moving forward on this issue in 2016, there was a request made to the Council of Bishops. And the request basically said, can the Council of Bishops create a study group to present possible ways that we could move forward? And they came up with 3 plans, and I think there was some teaching around that, and maybe you're familiar with the 3 plans. So the study group reflected theologically, studied other denominations, tried to put forth 3 possibilities in terms of how the United Methodist Church could respond to the issue of the LGBT community. So one of those is called the traditional plan, and that is the one that passed. And it pretty much articulates a traditional understanding theologically of human sexuality and says that basically homosexuals are welcome in our churches, but they shouldn't serve as our pastors, and our pastors should not perform weddings for same-sex couples, and they shouldn't happen on our property. Okay? There was another plan called the One Church Plan that basically would have removed all the restrictive language and left it up to every local congregation to kind of follow their conscience, every annual conference to kind of come to their own understanding about whether to ordain gay people or not. And that was defeated, and the traditional plan was put into place. The traditional plan had several measures to try to limit the authority of bishops and kind of sort of move toward what you might think of as mandatory sentencing. So if a pastor performed a same-gender wedding, for example, there was a desire that that person would have a 1-year suspension. There was a desire to take the boards of ordained ministry, the groups that interview people who want to go into ministry, and have them sign kind of a statement that they would withhold or they would uphold the discipline and sort of have a litmus test in terms of who could be on that committee. There were some things like that. Now, what most typical Methodists probably really didn't know until you heard about it is that we even have a judicial council. But let me just kind of explain. The Methodist Church came to life about the same time the United States government came to life. And so we have a legislative body, the General Conference. We have an executive branch, which is the Council of Bishops, and we have a judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. So our judicial council is 9 people elected from any United Methodist group around the world. So if you've read up or looked at where the Judicial Council comes from, several of those are not from the United States. We're a worldwide church, and people around the world have input and significant leadership in our denomination. So, in February, the General Conference met, and they passed what's called the traditional plan, and they passed some additional amendments to that plan. And that got us a lot of kind of negative press. A lot of people were very upset. Some people were very simplistic in terms of how they described what those things meant. Probably most folks, in all honesty, didn't really understand what it meant to say, well, is this constitutional or not constitutional? Because most Methodists, in all honesty, don't even know that the Methodist Church has a constitution. Maybe that's new for you too. And talking with friends, they said, people think it's the U.S. Constitution that they're talking about. They don't know we have a Constitution. So I'm trying to cover a lot of things, but what you need to know is there's a pretty detailed structure in place for how we do our business, okay? So the plan was passed in February, and one of the first things you heard is, well, it's going to go to the Judicial Council for review. The whole plan could get thrown out. Certain amendments could get thrown out. Nobody really knew what the court was going to do because this is the first time that the Judicial Council had reviewed any kind of proposal like this. So in broad strokes, what happened last week was that our Judicial Council reviewed the actions of General Conference. It found that that group had the right to make certain decisions based on our Constitution, and that others were not constitutional. For example, most of them that dealt with the authority of bishops found to be unconstitutional because the bishop's authority is defined and detailed in the Constitution, and you can't just take somebody's authority away like that. Other things were upheld, like there's sort of an enhanced definition of what a self-avowed practicing homosexual would be. That's been one of the phrases or standards that's been in place since I've been in ministry in terms of who cannot be ordained. And so there was some tightening up of that language. Are you still with me? Okay, so you may or may not like what happened, because I assume there's people of all different viewpoints. But what's the first slide that you have? Is it the things that were upheld? Oh, well, there you go. 3 font, that'll be easy to read. Okay, so let me tell you the things that were sort of originally passed that have been thrown out. Let's see if I can do that fairly quickly. 3 of them relate with the bishop's power and authority. All right, I'll try that. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I didn't come here so you couldn't hear me, so I appreciate it. Okay, so what sort of got ruled unconstitutional? 3 things that would limit the bishop's authority. So one was a measure that would force bishops to take involuntary retirement. One was a category for involuntary leave for bishops. And one was to create a different way of supervising bishops or dealing with bishops when they have a charge brought against them. So let me kind of explain. My sense is that people who voted for this felt that the bishops in the United States were too progressive and too tolerant. You may know, I'll just pick Northern Illinois as an example, where Sally Dick is. Some of you know who Sally Dick is. She was a member in our conference. So she has an openly gay person that she has appointed to her cabinet, who's a district superintendent. And there are people who would say, well, that violates the discipline, and she should be brought up on charges, and she should perhaps be forced to retire, or she should be put on a leave of absence because she's done that. And so the Judicial Council looked at how a bishop's authority is exercised and said the three things to try to limit the authority of the bishops is unconstitutional. The sort of litmus test that people who serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry have to sign a statement that they will uphold the entire discipline has been set aside. And that's kind of a good thing, because I don't know that any pastor upholds the entire book of discipline. I mean, it stipulates that we have special offerings. It stipulates some things that are really not life and death, and that are sort of taken more as advisory than rules. It also set aside the requirement that the Board of Ordained Ministry specifically ask a candidate whether or not they are homosexual. And additionally, it set aside a requirement that the Board of Ordained Ministry nominees only certify heterosexual people, or those members could be have penalties filed against them. And the last one was that, again, relating to the Board of Ordained Ministry. So the big categories, the things that got set aside, were basically the authority of the bishops to act and use their own judgment, and some efforts to try to make the Board of Ordained Ministry process more strict, to make sure that gay people did not become ordained pastors in the church. Those were all thrown out. So what was left in, Steve? I know you want to know. The first is an expanded definition of what it means to be a self-avowed, practicing homosexual. And to define that as living in a domestic partnership, or to have a husband or wife, or to present yourself as a gay person, to have that on your Facebook, or be known in your community as a gay person. So that was upheld, that the church has the authority to define what is meant by those words. The second is a prohibition from bishops consecrating, commissioning, or ordaining self-avowed homosexuals. Okay, so on our books, what it says is, if I go to the district committee and I say I am a gay person and I want to be ordained as a United Methodist pastor, that the Board of Ordained Ministry cannot then pass me along and move me toward ordination. The Judicial Council upheld the mandatory requirement that if a pastor is convicted of performing same-gender wedding, that the penalty for that would be 1 year suspension without pay. So that's a pretty serious thing that they've approved. It upheld the prohibition that the Board of Ordained Ministry cannot bring openly gay people to be ordained. It upheld a complaint process, which is kind of complicated, but that's the process we would use if a pastor violated some part of the discipline. I, as their supervisor, might file a complaint. A simple example would be if Paul takes off with $50,000 of your money and is guilty of theft, I would file a complaint, and he would probably lose his credentials because of that criminal act. So that's more typically how that works. Sorry, Paul. And it upheld in our process, when a charge is filed, the first step is that the bishop, the person filing the charge, let's just say it's me, and Paul would meet together. And we would seek what's called a just resolution, which means we talk about what damage has been done, why the charge has been filed, and we try to resolve that. If it's a theft thing, it's a little bit different. Let's just say Paul was not preaching well or sleeping in or derelict in his duties or something like that. There would be a process where we would meet, we would talk, we would try to resolve it before it ever goes to a church trial or anything further down the list of responses. And this is just very vague, but the final thing I wanted to mention is that there's an affirmation of a petition that allows the church to appeal errors of law from trial courts. I'm not even going to tell you that. I don't even know what that means. It's one of those technical things that really is probably deeper in the weeds than we need to go. And there has been a measure passed that seeks to make it more easily possible for churches to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. Churches on both ends of the spectrum, wherever you fall, whether you're a conservative or you're a progressive, there are congregations of people who have said either we can't stay in the Methodist Church anymore, they're too liberal and they're not enforcing their rules and we're going to leave, or people who have said the United Methodist Church is harming people, it's eliminating the leadership of people who God has called, it is on the wrong side of this issue. So there is a process called disaffiliation. It's still being kind of perfected. I just want to tell you, nobody is doing that anytime soon, but there would be a process. We envision there would be a process in the future where churches who felt for reasons of conscience that they couldn't remain in the United Methodist Church may be able to leave. That's probably at least 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road until that's kind of perfected and we know how to make that work. So again, it's very technical. Bishop Malone sat with us on Tuesday and kind of walked through these. What she basically said, which I think is really good advice, because I said, I'm coming to Rocky River, and they're going to want to know what to do. And her advice was simply this: keep on doing what you're doing first and foremost. In the United Methodist Church, we disagree about a lot of stuff. If we took a poll on gun control, for example, I'm sure there would be a diversity of opinion. If we took it on military interventions in other countries, there's a lot of different things that we disagree on. We have a common faith journey, a story that has touched our story, that brings us together. And she also pointed out that very little has changed in the life of your church in the last 3 months. With all these rulings and everything else that's happened, what actually tangibly has changed in your church. Now, that's not to minimize the importance of this issue, because I know some of you may have family members, sons, daughters, it may be you, that these struggles affect. Others of you have deeply held understandings of what it means to live as a righteous life, as a representative of Christ, that pastors serve at a higher standard than other folks. You have every right to those views as well. I would tell you that I think being a leader right now is staying connected with people that you disagree with. And also just encouraging people to slow down a little bit, that we're not at a crisis moment where everybody has to decide everything instantly. If you look historically, for example, about racial issues, we haven't got that all figured out yet. We're not in a place where any of us should feel comfortable about how ethnic minorities fit into the United Methodist Church, it's still a struggle. When we look at a church and we have an African American pastor and we say this person could go there, oftentimes we have to sort of shake our heads and say, I don't think that community would be a good place for that person. We've had the same struggle with women in ministry. Lori started you off 60 years ago. Lori wouldn't be ordained. And that's a fairly recent thing. So I don't by any means want to suggest that you should minimize your feelings, but I would say that big things like race, gender, sexuality, it takes a long time for the church to kind of get it right. And so that's kind of what we're in the midst of right now. What you may already know is in 2020, there'll be another general conference, and there'll be another go-round around this issue along with some others. And we will have a chance to either reaffirm what's already been affirmed or to change parts of this that people feel need to be changed. If you're wondering where I'm at, I'll just tell you. I've been a pastor since 1985. I'm an old dude now. I think our best pastors do everything they can to serve their congregations and even to serve those that they disagree with. That we try to stay focused on something bigger than, I don't mean to minimize this, but sometimes people fight about the strangest things in churches. You know, the music, the color of the tile in the room. To be a pastor is always sort of be caught in the middle between people who disagree. So what I want to encourage you just to think about is, how are you expressing the love of Christ to those who see things differently? And if you become hostile or divisive with each other, how does that help the church do its work? So I'm happy. I think I've gone over my minutes already, and I'll be happy to answer questions you may have when that time comes, but I know there's other people who are going to present other parts of this. And I just, first of all, want to thank you for your interest in coming tonight. Second of all, I want to encourage you to live out your ministry that you feel God has called you to live out. And don't let the church ever get in the way of that, but don't ever believe that the church is trying to stop you from that either. We need to follow our conscience and do what we feel called to do. And we probably will be in a different place somewhere down the road than we are now. So it will come from people like you who do the important work. One last comment. I was in a church that really disagreed with the traditional plan, and they said, well, what can we do? And I said, well, I wish I could tell you that you could do more, but here's really the honest truth. In your community, people know who your church is. They know whether they're welcome here or not. They know whether you love them or not. They also usually know that big organizations sometimes have statements that not everybody agrees with. So the most important thing you can do is keep inviting people to learn the story of Christ, to find their story and how it links up with that, to keep doing your ministry at the Twice Blessed Free Store. Those are the really crucial things. And my hunch is we can disagree on this and a lot of other stuff and still bring glory to God through how we live. So thank you for listening, and I'll be around to answer questions. Oh, no. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of touchy.
It's a lively mic.
Okay, so we'd like to take just 2 or 3 questions for Steve.
The peace candle is out. That's not good.
So what we'd like to do is, Bill will have a microphone. Please raise your hand if you have a question only about what Steve shared right now. We'll have questions more after the other presentation. So state your name and what your question is. Bill, we have one over here.
Oh, I think he's got one
Oh, got one right here? Okay, please go ahead. And about 30 seconds, max.
Sure.
Okay.
This is real quick, just a clarification. I've heard a lot about the quadrang, the every 4 years conferences, which this past year was, and then that there's another conference next year, the annual conference, and I'm really confused about how that
Well,
works.
of course you are, because we were so clever, we named everything we did the same name, right? So there is the annual conference, which is the gathering of all the pastors in the East Ohio area and lay people from the East Ohio area that meets at Lakeside. That's every year. The general conference meets every 4 years. It's an international gathering. There's actually also a thing called a jurisdictional conference, which is where bishops get elected. And they do some work there too. So no wonder you're confused, because we weren't very clever when we came up with these names.
Well, I was going to ask the same question, Steve, but maybe you've answered it in a way that I'm more confused. So this 2020 conference, does it have the wherewithal to change the international plan?
Yes, when the General Conference meets, it has the most authority of any other body in the church, and it has the authority to rewrite things that have been said before, to change any part of the discipline that might need to be changed. Now, that doesn't mean that the Judicial Council wouldn't review whatever legislation was passed, and if it's unconstitutional based on our structure, then they would throw that out again. But the General Conference has the capacity and responsibility to speak for the Methodist Church and has the most authority of all.
Barbara Morrison. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Barb.
I didn't hear you say when you were explaining about the February conference in St. Louis about who voted, and I'm not sure that everyone here is aware that it was all over the world Methodists, that you could explain that, but it was only going to, the change was only going to affect those of us in the United States.
Well, actually, the change will affect everybody, everybody who follows the discipline. But here, let me answer the question quickly. There are 846 delegates from all over the world. The United Methodist Church has done great missions work all around the world. Africa, Asia, not so much in Europe anymore, but many, many places. And when we've evangelized and brought people into the United Methodist Church, we've made them full members. They're not second class. They're not restricted on what they do. The delegates who go to General Conference are elected a lot like congressional districts. In other words, the East Ohio Conference had 6 clergy people and 6 lay people based upon our population. So let's just say 100,000 people equals 1 delegate, just to make it simple. In other countries that have a growing population, where the population density is thicker, and that would be some areas of Africa in particular, where we've had tremendous success with missionary efforts, and Asia, particularly Korea and the Philippines. They had more delegates than that who came. So it's representational government based upon population. One of the ways you could think about that as the U.S., the United Methodist Church in the United States becomes smaller through attrition. Other countries will have more influence on the voting process and the standards because we'll be a smaller population of the total group.
Good evening, Steve.
Hi.
I'm going to do my best to keep this to 30 seconds, but what I'm trying to get to is where you stand and where the bishop stands with the Book of Discipline. Later this month, Adam Hamilton is going to have a conference in which 10 delegates from 54 conferences are going to attend to decide, do they form a new Methodism or do they stand in disobedience? Recently, an open letter was sent to the bishop. It was signed by over 70 bishops, elders, and clergy, in which they stated that they cannot accept the decision made in St. Louis, their intention to marry same-sex couples, and to basically not abide by what was decided in St. Louis. So if one of these pastors were in fact to perform a marriage, which according to a bishop in her comments on the 29th of April in the EOC News, would be against the 2016 Book of Discipline, which is our governing book until January of 2020. Could you comment on what your actions or the bishops would be if that was to take place?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me tell you, it has happened. And in situations where it has happened, typically there's discussion with the person. I think I think it would be fair, I can't speak for anybody other than myself, but I would say in general, the leadership of your conference always wants to be gracious to anybody that we deal with. So it's not our nature to treat people like criminals who have, because of their conscience, tried to be in ministry. There were, for example, if you're my age, you remember clergy marching in the streets in the South, desegregating areas, technically breaking the law because of their conscience. So we recognize that sometimes that's how things change, and sometimes that's just disruptive. There's a process where if a pastor would do that, I would consult with them, I would talk with them. I guess the best answer I can give you, it would be a case-by-case basis. And it would not be that we would ignore the discipline. We would certainly respond to that news when we heard it. Would it be treated like a crime in a church trial? We try every way we can to avoid that, because the last thing we want to do is be treating people like criminals who, out of their own conscience and their own understanding of their faith, are doing the best they can to serve. Just as if we were a more progressive church and there were people refusing to perform weddings, and pastors always have been free to refuse to do weddings, we wouldn't want to persecute a more conservative pastor who declined the opportunity to do that. So, and frankly, across the country, there's a whole lot of variation. You may know there's entire annual conferences where they're sort of in defiance of that, feeling they need to push the ball forward by acts of disobedience, and there's other conferences where they're very much enforcing the discipline the way it's written. So I hope that helps.
I'm going to stop here for our questions right now. Thank you so much, Steve. That was very helpful, so that we have time for all the other presentations. So hold your questions, and if we run out of time and your questions aren't answered, we have someone taking notes about questions, and there'll be future times. This won't be the only time we'll be talking about this. So I'd like to ask Bill Coles to come up and speak on our church's implications.
Let me get all my stuff organized here. Sorry. Thank you all for coming. Many of you are here because you have determined that it is time to make a big decision about whether or not this is to be your church home going forward or not. We get that, and we've been through that process. For the next few minutes, I'll offer some perspective from the viewpoint of our Way Forward team. In March, Reverend Adam Hamilton taught a class at the Perkins School of Laity Theology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And he did some research with those students and others on campus. And I'd like to share with you what he found. First of all, 4 words and categories have been used to describe where United Methodists stand on same-sex marriage in the church. The first of those terms is traditionalist, and that essentially boils down to the belief that marriage is between a man and a woman. The next one is progressive, and those people believe that God allows his gay and lesbian children to marry as well. Then we have a different kind of a term called an incompatibilist. And essentially that person states, I cannot be in a church where others disagree with me and are allowed to do something different than what I believe is right regarding same-sex marriage. Now, obviously, on the counter to that is the compatibilist. And I can be in a church where others disagree with me and are allowed to do something different from what I believe is right regarding same-sex marriage. To expand that a little bit, a compatibilist, most traditionalists and progressives believe there is room for Christians to disagree in how they read and interpret Scripture regarding same-sex marriage. For example, there's a traditionalist compatibilist. Most of these folks are willing to allow for same-sex marriage in other churches, provided they are not required to officiate. Then you have progressive compatibilists, and most are willing to allow traditionalists to not marry same-sex couples, provided they are allowed to do so. So there are some distinguishing characteristics, and they charted their results. And you can see that it's a typical bell curve from those results, and I think the sample size was somewhere between 400 and 450 people. So you can see at either end, either very conservative or very progressive, there are between 15 and 20% of the people. Some on the very conservative side would be called traditional incompatibilists. On the progressive incompatibilist side, they're about 15%. And in that broad center are what would be a range of compatibilists made up of both progressives and traditionalists. So if you look at that, in Hamilton's assessment, these findings most certainly reflect the attitudes of the American Methodist Church. Even so, there are many ongoing discussions about disaffiliation by churches on either side of the argument. And as recent national news has reported, our own Baldwin Wallace University has declared itself to be incompatibilist and has discontinued its United Methodist affiliation. Our team has concluded that Rocky River United Methodist Church's position in this universe is in that broad center spectrum, where both belief proponents agree to behave in partnership for the greater good of the church in the world. So let's consider three pertinent questions surrounding this. Number one, why is this a church worth saving and serving? Number two, why is it important? And number three, what's at stake? First of all, why is this a church worth saving and serving? There are three reasons. First one is it has a clear, compelling vision. Our job is to help people meet Jesus Christ in the midst of their stories. Many people here, including our family, were drawn to this church specifically because of that mission. It is a uniquely powerful magnet, and I'll bet that everyone here can recite it, and every ministry reflects it. Number two, we are blessed with visionary leadership. Ministries emerge and grow organically from the bottom up. Ideas that further the mission get support from pastors and staff and lay members. And third, we produce life-changing impact. The lives of people we touch are made better by our being there, both within and outside our walls. So why is all this important? It's our future. Consider that 80% of the people in Cuyahoga County don't have a church home. There are a significant number of young people who couldn't care less about a church home right now, but soon will be starting relationships and families and looking for a church connection. People of any age who have never been exposed to church but feel a yearning for the first time are also part of that population. They will look at our website and social media sites first. They'll ask their friends second and chance a visit third. If they don't have a clear vision of who we are from our website, we don't have a chance of ever seeing them in church. Secondly, there's a whole population of de-churched people out there. These are good church people who have been somehow abused or offended or hurt by their church, so they have bailed out. And these are people who are searching for a new or different church. Some of these people may have been rejected or abused by other churches in the past and are looking for a safe, non-judgmental place to connect with God. Some simply have drifted away, yet are open to a welcoming invitation. And finally, it's important because of our own next generations. If we don't do what we need to reach out and attract the unchurched and de-churched, there won't be a church here for our own children and grandchildren. We are not too big to fail. I have seen it happen as recently as last Sunday. when we attended the closing ceremony coincident with the 60th anniversary of a church that we had been a part of and our family grew up in for 40 years. And it's closed its doors. So, what's at stake? Here's a long list of things that are at stake. And you know them because you make them possible. You participate in them. You give them life. You produce the impact that we have in the communities because of them. They're familiar. They're things that have grown up in this congregation and been championed by people sitting in this room. Finally, think about this. Over the history of our denomination, we've had split opinions on a wide range of social and political issues, yet we all found a way to be in ministry together to bring the light of Jesus Christ into some dark corners of the world and to build a faith family that loves and supports each other on our unique journeys. It's not as much about what we believe, but about how we behave. Rocky River United Methodist Church has been a church that has behaved admirably to people in need. And I pray that our future is not altered by differences in beliefs. Because if not us for the glory of God, who? If not now for the growth of his kingdom, when? Thank you.
I'd like to ask Tom Dewey to come up now, please.
I'm going to try not to touch that thing either. Hopefully everyone can hear. So my name is Tom Dewey. I'm here to give a brief update from the business and financial side of the church. I'm going to just cover overall the Finance Committee and what we've been up to, Staff Parish Relations Committee, and the trustees. So please, if you've got any questions, just yell them out. So over the years, as you know, the people in this church or in this room have built a very, very strong church. Attendance is strong. You see it every Sunday. You just hit the services. New ideas flourish. The list that Bill just showed, shows the impact that we're having. And we've risen from some dark financial days. While I wasn't around back in 2008 and 2009 at the church, talking to Dan, who was on the backside of that, and some others who were here, there were some tough financial times. But we've done a great job as a church overall and now have a very stable financial situation, which we should all be thankful for and appreciate. So for this year, for 2019, we went into the year knowing we were going to run at a deficit. And so a deficit means we're going to actually spend more money than we take in, which is not a sustainable situation, but it's a situation that the Finance Committee and the Administrative Council made very deliberately, just given all the great stuff that we've done. And the great thing is because of the financial situation of the church, we've got the reserves built up where we can afford to do that. It's not something we can sustain in the long run. But certainly, over the course of this year, we've made that conscious decision. And really, what's nice is we've built up reserves to the point where the church can withstand some storms. And it's been through the diligent effort of the people in this room who have done that. And really what our focus is not having short-run decisions have a negative impact on the staff here, which we love, and on all the ministries that we're doing that are just breathing life into the church and into the community. And really, that's the collective goal of the trustees, the Staff Parish Relations Committee, and the Finance Committee, to minimize the impact that this decision has on the church, on the staff, and on the ministries that we're doing each and every day. So as you may expect, these three groups have been planning around the fact that this decision was coming, and there could be some negative repercussions from the financial side for the church. We are aware at times like these call for prudent financial measures, and we've taken those prudent financial measures over the course of the past year. We made the very, very difficult decision that the staff members of the church were not going to get a raise this year. And that's tough. It's tough to look at those people who are doing the work for us each and every day at a time when the broader economy is doing extremely well, and we hear about how well the economy is doing, and we're asking our people here not to take a raise, and that's been tough. But the prudent financial management has been helpful, but I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that this decision has already started to have some impact on the financial side of the church. We've lost members as a result of this. We are not going to collect all the pledge revenue that we expected. At this point, it's not anything that's insurmountable, but it's certainly something that we need to plan for. be cognizant of. It's just like in your home or in your business, when you're not going to have all the cash inflow that you thought, you need to make decisions that reflect the reality of the situation. So in order to minimize the impact of some of that lost revenue, we've taken a couple steps. One, we've asked all of the leaders in the church to use increased discretion with their spending over the course of the rest of this year, making sure that if something doesn't need to be spent, it's not spent. The trustees have paused some projects, one of which is finding a new, larger home for the Twice Blessed Free Store, which is an important ministry of the church, instead opting to wait to see what the impact is of this broader UMC decision is on our church and on the financial situation. All of you know, you wouldn't be here if you didn't know, but there are just so many great things happening in the life of the church. We're confident that the church, which has been around for a long, long time, is going to continue to thrive. We just need to stick together as a congregation, work through this, continue to make wise decisions, as the people in this room have done for a long period of time, and make sure we're around for generations to come. Thank you.
Okay, you have heard from many people about what's going on, so now it's time to open the floor for your questions. So remember, try to keep it to 30 seconds, and Bill will be going around with the microphone. Please, if you will, state your name and what your question is. And the candle is lit, so I'll unlight it if things are getting heated, okay? Okay, so please raise your hand, and Bill will go around, and we'll get your questions answered.
Elaine Miller. I want to know how we think as a church we can attract young people who in their education have learned, smarter than some of us others, that gays are just as good as we are and many even better. And how are we going to get them and the unchurched who we're turning away in a way? I just don't see how we think we can continue.
Okay, team, who would like to answer that?
Yeah, Elaine, I'll just take a stab, because I've seen lots of churches fail because they don't address that kind of a question. I think the words we use, the things we put on our website and social media will either attract people or push them away. And I think that the more we can do to assure people that, we're all about the love of Christ here, and that we are not a discriminating body, and that we do not try to, force any one set of beliefs on each other, that people will continue to come and take a look at us, and then after they see what's here, then they can make an informed decision. But it's going to take a while, and I appreciate your sentiment on that, because it is a tough question.
I'm wondering, in your presentation, how you determined that what our church, how our church fell in the bell curve, when I don't know that anyone was ever polled. That's the first part of my question. And then the second part is that, hello? Oh, there it is.
Here, okay.
See, I believe that we actually, our church looks to, and I hate to do this, but our church looks to our leaders, and we are discriminating. Okay, oh, yes, it's working. There was a letter that went out on February 27th from our pastors, and they really stood out and said that they do not believe that that these folks, actually they used the term that they said that God disapproves of embracing such a lifestyle. And I have to tell you that this really upset me. And so I don't know how we can say that our church is one way when we have this is what we're hearing. And they basically, it said, any who conclude that this is not possible for them, giving the stance of the denomination of your pastors, knowing that we will deeply grieve such a decision, but will also respect it and release you with love and affection to a different church home, which you feel is better suited to provide for your faith journey. So I really felt like that was just like, if you don't believe this, then so long, the door's open. So how do we,
Steve, you wanna say
how do we deal with that when it may be fine that my next, the person sitting next to me has differing views, but it's different when your leaders do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I already got asked tonight where I stand, right?
Okay, hey,
So
Steve, can I answer the first part of our question first?
Yeah, sure.
I did not mean to imply that our church had voted or somehow polled itself into, it was the recommendation of our team, our Way Forward team, that's where we hoped that we would land.
Yeah.
And if I did not state that clearly, I apologize.
No, that's. Okay, well, let me respond. We, with the strongest, powerful feelings, would urge you not to do that. The minute you take a vote, you take a poll, you put numbers there, there's an in-group, there's an out-group, there's a majority, there's a minority, it will split your church and destroy you. So we really, really don't think that's a good idea. A much better idea is do what I have a hunch you already do, and that's you're having conversations with friends. You're talking to people, and maybe even you're talking with people that see things differently. That's what builds up respect for each other, capacity to tolerate people with different views. You begin to understand, I don't think my grandparents would ever understand this issue. I don't know if you think about, there has been a change in thought and a change in theology, in all honesty, which, people who are progressive aren't ignoring the scriptures, and people who are conservative are not just taking that in at face value. So we really don't encourage in any way voting on this. We encourage dialogue within Christian community so that you understand one another better. The second part of your question, which was brilliant, and now my brain has gone blank, was related to the leaders. Okay, so let me tell you, first of all, in my opinion, you have two of the finest pastors in the entire annual conference, and I think most of you agree with that. I think that within the 60 to 70 pastors that I supervise, they're every edge of the spectrum, and I believe all of them are doing the best they can. Some pastors would choose not to answer the question, well, where do you stand or what do you think? Your pastors are pretty intentional about their leadership, and they'll tell you the truth. But, when you do that, there's a hazard, because if people disagree with you, then you've kind of put a little bit of a wedge there too. Like, people can be disappointed with your answer or angry with your answer or feel like, how can you possibly see things that way? So your dynamic right now is your pastors have been leaders, and they have stated where they're at. I don't think they've intended to say this is a hostile environment where if you don't see things the way we do, leave. I'm certainly, in my experience with both of them, that's something I don't think they would ever say. I think sometimes when we read things, I always tell pastors, be careful what you put in an email or things like that, because the tone isn't there and people don't know exactly how you're saying that, particularly with sensitive or important things. A phone call, a face-to-face is much better. So I hear those words and I can understand how they would be hurtful. I don't think they were intended that way, and I would just say, remember the totality of your experience with your pastors, and not just maybe one document that came out. So I get that you felt it was hurtful and frustrating, and that there was some damage done as you read that document.
Yeah, we need the microphone. Yeah.
Oh, now.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jean, and I am not a member of this church, but I've been attending for a while. And I was a member of another United Methodist church. And if I understood what you said, is that the pastor felt that the gay lifestyle wasn't compatible with, and a pastor at my old church was pastoring a young woman and encouraging her to come. And she was a sex worker. And she said, I really can't come to church because most of my customers are there. There's a lot of things that are not compatible with the Christian community. It's just that when they're underneath, nobody talks about. This one's out in the open. And when you tell me that my lifestyle is not compatible, I disagree with the district superintendent. I'm not sure how I could not take that hurtfully.
Thank you, Jean.
It makes it, when you say a lifestyle, it makes it sound like it's a choice, and it's not. I mean, that's so old. It's just wrong, and it's hurtful in a lot of ways.
Okay, what about more questions? Thank you all for those who are sharing. Any other questions?
My name is Angie Cadwallader. I'm not a member, but my husband is. But I have followed this situation very closely. I'm aware of the letter. When it came out, I thought the first paragraph was really great. I too was upset. And I would like to say this in defense of our pastors. I'm not speaking for them, this is my interpretation. The day the letter was written was the day the vote took place. Our pastors, not just here, but everywhere, I think a lot of people thought the one church plan was going to pass, and it didn't. Number two, our pastors made it clear their stand, but they also said if the one church plan passed, they could live with that because they weren't going to be forced to perform these functions. An outside minister who would be a Methodist minister could come in who would be willing to do these services. That didn't change our pastors' concerns and leadership. But when you are following something this difficult in the Methodist Church, they tried to respond rapidly to give an answer, and maybe perhaps more than one set of eyes should have read the letter and had a little more time to think it before it went out. I know our pastors. They would have never said or done anything that would have been hurtful. And they're humans. They're human beings. They made it, so maybe that portion of it wasn't meant to come out. I do believe I am born right-handed, and there are people born left-handed. They are born this way. But in defense of our pastors, I think they tried very hard, and it was very hard for them because I think they were shocked too. So don't think our pastors aren't doing their job. They really are.
Thank you, Angie. Okay, are there any other questions about what was presented tonight?
Other comments, questions? Oh, right here.
My question is, how, for those of us who really disagree with this, how is there a way, I mean, you know, I grew up in the Methodist Church, my mother worked in the Methodist Church, so there is this piece of democracy. How is there a way for those of us who really disagree for it to be able to have more, I'm not suggesting polling people's opinions, But how is there a way for us to feel that there's more of a way for us to have a vote or a say or something in this church that we, and I don't even necessarily mean this particular church, but I know that there's folks that represent us. I mean, how is there a way to know maybe either what way they voted or for us to be able to have a bigger piece in that?
Okay, so your question basically is, how do you influence the system for the change that you seek? Well, I wish I could tell you some really good ideas. The truth is, this entire annual conference sent 6 delegates that were 6 out of 846. So even if you elected all of the delegates that reflected exactly what you believe, it's a very small minority of that entire global population. It would be as difficult as convincing Congress to do something about health care or animal abuse or any other issue that you might pick up. So that's the bad news. This is a big system, and frankly, individuals or even individual churches and even individual annual conferences really don't have a lot of capacity to change the opinions of other people. The good news is that there are people all around you every day who look to see who this church is, that walk through your doors, that interact with you, that discover a place of hospitality and caring, that may discover within this membership of this church, there are people who see this in a lot of different ways. And my hope personally is always that no matter how different somebody might be, whatever their ethnic makeup or their political views, that when they come into a church, they would find something bigger than that, that creates common ground with people. What you do as a congregation in many ways speaks louder than a declaration in a book that most people never read. Now, for people like Dan and Paul and I who serve in the administrative structure of churches and so forth, we interact with people who may be seeking ordination. It's maybe a little bit more real issue for us in terms of where the church policies are. We are part of a system that's trying to figure out what we do with these complex issues. So I don't want to tell you, like, write your congressman or things like that, because this isn't going to make any difference, really. But how you live as a disciple of Jesus Christ always makes a difference. And my sense is the church is in a very different place than it was 20 or 30 years ago. It'll be in a different place 10, 20, 30 years from now, I think, in terms of how we understand some of these things. But we haven't solved a lot of other really big issues either. We're still working to get them in the right spot. So I just want to encourage you, the church has never been a perfect group of people. All those letters Paul wrote, he wrote because people in churches disagreed and were having struggles and saw things differently. That's who we are. And yet there's something bigger than all those struggles and disagreements that unites us. And that, I think, is the most important thing you can do, is focus on what brings people together and gives them hope.
Steve, I'd like to tag on to that, if you may. As chair of Ad Council for the last 2.5 years, I've seen a lot of this happen. Remember when I talked about one of the strengths we have is that ministries grow organically here? That can happen again. You know, if you talk about discussion groups, Bible study groups, support groups, anything that would offer people an opportunity to be in discussion with each other, to do some study, to do some programming, that's possible. You have the ability to do that. And this church will provide every avenue available to help you do that. So there are things that you can do. Brian, you had
I understand that there's currently some gay people serving as ordained ministers. So what does this vote do to them, and what are their options?
Come on up, Steve.
All right. It makes life very uncomfortable for them. It makes it very difficult to be an openly gay person in the United Methodist Church, whether you're a pastor or a staff person or a member, and feel comfortable. We do have a bishop, many of you know that, Karen Olavito, who was elected, who's your bishop.
Yep, my bishop.
Elected in the Rocky Mountain, elected in the Western jurisdiction.
Mountain Sky now.
serves in the Mountain Sky Conference. Some of these things related to episcopal authority were directly targeted toward her, in all honesty, and minimizing her capacity to lead. So, Bishop Malone has said this, whatever goes into effect is not retroactive. So, if there's greater definition or automatic crime or sentencing or things like that, it's going forward, not backward. So none of these changes take effect until next January, and at least in the United States, there's a slower timeline for other regions in terms of when they get implemented. But undoubtedly, it has hurt people, it has embarrassed people, it has angered people on both sides. Before this happened, I consulted with many of my pastors, and we sort of said, no matter what happens, we're going to lose, because there's going to be somebody not happy with whatever happens. So we're trying to lead in a time that's very difficult, and for those who are out, one of the things that many people are trying to do is just rally around them, encourage them, affirm them. There's not a process where Bishop Oliveto can be removed that I'm aware of, and that I suppose that theoretically could change because the General Conference can change things. But yeah, for now, going forward, we'll see how these get implemented, but people are not at grave risk. Like if a pastor, let me give you an example. So they upheld the 1-year suspension, right? And said General Conference can make those kind of rules. Whether that stands or not, who knows? But if I went out today and performed a same-gender wedding and Lori filed charges against me, I could potentially be suspended for a year, okay? If I did that 3 years ago, it would be under the rules or the regulations of 3 years ago. So, hope that answers your question.
Steve, does somebody have to file a charge or does it have to come from a member if this rule went into effect and you perform a ceremony like that? And who files against you? Who gets to do that?
Anybody. So, let's say if I violated this part of the discipline, you could file a charge against anybody who's at the wedding could file a charge against me. Any pastor who heard that I had done it could file a charge against me. Any pastor in the country or world could file a charge against me. Then there's no charge. Yeah. So I would tell you that at our, so all of the clergy have what we call an executive session on May 20th. And we're going to talk extensively about this and how we live together as a covenant community. The bishop does not want pastors becoming hostile, adversarial, suspicious, filing charges right and left against each other. That's not our covenant. Our covenant, by and large, really is to love and respect each other even when we disagree. Before the One Church plan even said that. So as professional colleagues, we understand for good reason because we know how different theologies see things differently. So I think that's what we're striving for as leaders in the annual conference is to be gracious with one another and to not go down the path of attacking one another or filing charges against each other. That's really not a good way to live and do ministry together.
Thank you, Steve. Let's take one more question, and then we're going to close this out. Bill?
You know better than that, right? This is not a question, but I want to share that I was the one that wrote the letter that came out that day. And I want to say to Mary and anybody else in the room that found any of the language in the letter offensive or hurtful, it was due to my ignorance, not to any ill intent. So I want you to hear that from the bottom of my heart. I apologize for anybody that felt offended by any of the wording or any of the language within the letter. Secondly, know that when I said that we grieve anytime somebody makes a decision to leave this church family, that was also a sincere statement. It was not intended to be a trite welcoming people to the door by any means. My heart is for all of us to stay together as one family and continue to worship together and take care of each other, have conversation around these things, as difficult as it can be, as tonight is evidence of. I don't want to see anybody leave. It breaks my heart. Thirdly, I would simply say that I was told tonight before this meeting happened that I wasn't going to be answering any questions, wouldn't have to say anything. There was part of me that was really, really excited to hear that. But at the same time, my heart's been in pain the entire time I've been sitting here because I want to be having these conversations, and I want to sit down with you that are hurting. I want to be able to. We may accomplish absolutely nothing as far as finding common grounds in these issues, but we can accomplish connecting our hearts, maybe finding more common ground than we think, and just having some honest, real conversation around important issues. And so that's where my heart's been. The day that I wrote the letter, my heart was in a place where my greatest fear, if I'm being perfectly honest, a lot of folks in the congregation knew what my views were, and my greatest fear was that day, my church family was sitting out there thinking that somehow, some way, I was celebrating the vote that took place and the results of it. That was not my heart at all. It felt like a grave disappointment on a number of levels because I knew the pain that it would cause. And so the letter's intent was to communicate to our church family that we're not here celebrating, we're not here waving branches and rejoicing the results of this, that our hearts are hurting right along with you in a different way. And I'm not going to pretend that I can understand or relate to those who are deeply hurting for reasons that are more personal as the result of this vote, but that my heart hurts when your heart hurts, even if it's for something that I can't fully understand. And so my intent that day was to communicate that to you and nothing else. So my apologies to anybody who were offended by the wording that I used. So that's all I wanted to share. And that's not all I wanted to share. I have 4 points. So I was trying to keep track of them up here. The fourth is simply this. I started talking about how I couldn't sit here and not want to say something. I do want to have these conversations. When the letter went out, I would have loved to have picked up the phone and called every single person on the rolls. I know that there are people in this congregation, this church family, that are angry and are frustrated, and some of that is directed towards me or towards Dan, to other people who have professed their views. And I simply want to remind you that my door is open, and I want to have these conversations. And to me, there's nothing more terrifying for the future of our denomination or the Christian church in general than for us to try and circumnavigate those conversations and pretend like we can make any progress or find any peace without having them. So they are painful. They hurt like heck, but we got to have them. And I'm terrified every time I sit down across from somebody who believes differently, because I know that my existence or my views could be in and of themselves hurtful to them. But I also know from the bottom of my heart that that is absolutely necessary, that we have those conversations. So please know my door is open. I want to talk to you. I want to hear your stories, and I want to hear your pain. And if you're open to it, share my own heart as well. I think that's it.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, well, I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. And if you have more questions, one more? Okay, one more, and then I'll thank you again.
Hi, I'm Marion McKinney. I thank you so much, Pastor Ball, for interjecting this. I find this all very interesting, how the hierarchy works and the votes and the delegates and the worldwide. But what is playing in our church, what is in our community, is that all of our lives as church members are interwoven with gay people who are our family, who we know, who we work with, who we live next door to. And this has not only been painful for me personally, it made me very angry to see the condemnation and the judgment. And I sincerely want to know, how does this jive with our story? For so many of us, our story is that we love a significant amount of gay people. I'm the parent of a gay child. I'm the aunt of a gay nephew. I am a neighbor to two people who are gay, who I've loved for 20 years. I'm a co-worker with several attorneys in the Department of Homeland Security who are gay and are adopting children. I'm intertwined inextricably with the lives of other gay people. I'm also intertwined with many gay people who are members of our church, or church members who have gay children, church members who are gay. There are a lot of people who are hiding this because they are afraid. They are afraid of the judgment, they are afraid of the pastors, they are afraid of other church members. They come out to me because I have never denied the fact that I'm the parent of a gay child. And that is the real issue. This is what's really playing here. Our lives are intertwined with gay people. I want to leave you with a quote from a very wise church father, Pope Francis. In 2013, they asked him, "What do you think of gay people?" And he said, "The key is for the church to welcome, not to exclude, to show mercy, not condemnation." He said, "If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" And I want to ask my church leaders, who are you to judge? Are we going to be a church of condemnation, or are we going to be a church of inclusion and mercy? I want to know that, because my story and so many of our church members, I believe everybody in this room probably has a gay person in their life. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be inclusion, exclusion? I'm not leaving. I'm here advocating for dialogue. I don't want the open door. I'm staying. I've been here a long time, and I'm staying. And I believe the answer for all of us is dialogue. And I don't want there to be talk of sides, progressives, traditionalists. We are church member. And isn't it all about our story?
Thank you.
Thank you. Before Lori dismisses us, just a couple of things that you may be interested in. The centrist progressive faction of the denomination is meeting at the Church of the Resurrection at the end of this month. So there will be more information and news to come out of that. We will make every effort to share that with you and anything else that comes along. On your own, you can follow virtually everything that's going on related to this issue at the United Methodist News Service. And then they have a Facebook page, and you can access them through the United Methodist main website. And I found their reporting to be very, very objective. So I would recommend that to you. And now we are going to close in prayer.
Thank you all for being here. Steve?
Before I pray, I just want to say thank you for your concern. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your witness. There's a lot of churches that can never have a conversation like this, and you are. And I hope you understand the value of that. And so thanks. Thanks for listening to each other. Thanks for daring to share your witness, your questions. Regardless of what gets written on a page, this isn't going to be resolved, because this is an issue we live with in our daily lives. So let's pray. God, we care about these things because we care about people. We care about helping people discover the fullness of life in you. And so we realize that for us to get between you and any child of yours that's returning to you would be wrong. We also struggle with how to articulate your message with freshness and newness in a new age. And we know that that we just don't have consensus around many of the questions that we face in life. My prayer is that more congregations will share the sort of listening that happened here tonight, that even as we leave, maybe not satisfied that the church is going to go where we want it to go, to know that we're a part of your church, we value and love each other, and that we listen for your voice even above the voice of our own opinion as we strive to follow you. We give you thanks for this magnificent group of leaders who serves this church, both the pastors, the lay staff, and those who serve as members of the church in leadership. Give you thanks for their steady, thoughtful guidance, and just pray that you continue to bless this place so that the story flows from our walls out into the world in a way that makes a real difference in people's lives. So thank you. We love you. Help us love each other, and help us work for what we feel you call us to work for. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.